Welcome to the Ars Aequi podcast, a series of discussions between legal researchers and experts on all things related to law and technology. And now, here are your podcast hosts.
Welcome to this very first episode of Ars Aequi. I'm Paul.
Hi, I'm Tima, and we are so excited to have you all joining us and listening to our podcast. During this podcast, we really want to take you all on an exciting journey. We're going to be discussing all things to do with law and technology through different series. We hope that you find this content informative and interesting. And please, just continue to join with us and continue to listen.
So I think we will start with introducing ourselves. My name is Paul. I am a researcher at the Department of Innovation and Digitalization in Law at the University of Vienna, where I also studied law. I'm from Austria, and I'm researching data protection law and legal tech.
And my name is Tima, like I've already said. I work with Paul at the Department of Innovation and Digitalization in Law. I work on several European-funded projects that deal with all things to do with data protection and technology and privacy law. And I am African. I'm African. I was born in Nigeria and I went to school and grew up most of my life in South Africa. I'm really interested in all things to do with the continent and the development of Africa, African law, and African technology.
So we are trying to give you a bit of an international perspective and different perspectives from our backgrounds, also to a very first topic, our very first series, which will be on fake news. So what the plan is for this podcast is that we have different series, each with a couple of episodes, just going into detail in one topic. And as I've said, the first one will be fake news.
Right. So the reason why we've decided to start with fake news is because, in the middle of this pandemic, we thought that fake news was a really important topic to discuss right now. As we've seen globally, governments and platforms have really reacted to the news that is shared online about the virus. Content that is created surrounding the virus has been heavily censored and restricted. We've seen platforms like YouTube taking down videos that have any mention of COVID-19 or Corona in them on the basis of the spread of false information or the spread of fake news. So we thought that as this is basically a hot topic right now, it would be really interesting for us to kind of dive in to the important legal and, just general social questions around fake news.
So for this first episode, we want to look at the definition of fake news and what this actually is that we're talking about and why this is something new and why we should care about this.
Exactly. So, as we know, there is no, or maybe you guys don't know, but we're going to tell you, there's no universal definition for fake news. So different jurisdictions kind of have different definitions. Some are similar, some are different from each other. And I think that has created kind of an environment of massive uncertainty in the international framework. So I'll give you some examples, right? So the EU's high-level task force definition focuses not on fake news per se, but on disinformation. So they define disinformation as all forms of false, inaccurate, or misleading information designed, presented, and promoted to intentionally cause public harm. So in the EU, the focus is really on the intention and the outcome of the spread of the fake news. And then we can contrast that to Singapore. Singapore has a new law that focuses on fake news. And the definition there is something along the lines of false statements or material that is communicated in Singapore and is communicated online via SMS, video, social network, or anything like that. So Singapore is less focused on the intention behind the communication and the overall effect, but more so on the fact that the statement itself is deemed to be false.
So this is a really broad definition, essentially outlawing lying online.
Exactly.
Whereas in Europe, it's more narrow definition, focusing on the intent and not just penalizing wrong information. So, but rather with more of a background and more intent to harm.
Exactly. So the EU is basically taking an approach where they're looking at what is detrimental to our population and how does the spread of fake news, does the spread of this news cause some sort of public disruption or public harm? Whereas in Singapore, the law even applies to personal messages that I might send to someone via MMS or a message that I send on a group or a platform that's not necessarily public in the sense.
So wrong information isn't anything new, really. So we've had lies for millennia, and we also had, from a legal perspective, things like defamation and libel laws and so on. So what is so different now with the term fake news in comparison to the decades before?
You know, Paul, I think the difference now is social media and the reach that one person can get by posting something, right? So in the past, you know, the disseminators of news and the creators of public discourse were journalists and news outlets and writers and people who had to kind of maintain a certain level of an ethical code or professional integrity.
Plus, they actually learned this stuff.
Exactly.
So
they went to school for it.
They went to school for it. They are actually professionals doing this and therefore have a certain code of conduct and certain responsibility also.
Exactly.
And this isn't true for social media. So anybody can broadcast information now. Anybody can start a blog. Anybody can start a Twitter account. And this has led to the spread of misinformation or added to it because it's so easy to spread information now.
And it's so easy to consume false information now.
Plus, the consumers of false information are often the spreaders of it. So it's one person starting all of this, but people that probably believe the wrong information are the ones that are spreading it. So the victims are more or less the spreaders of fake news.
Exactly. So I feel like we're in a time period where there's a lot more possible detrimental effects from the spread of fake news, and there's a lot more incentive for regulators and governors, especially in the advent of, you know, a pandemic like we're in. There's a lot more incentive for them to want to really control that and be sure of what is posted online. But the flip side of that is that there's definitely a limitation on, you know, the right to freedom of expression. So, you know, how do you see that as a balance or in contrast?
I mean, we've seen this with Trump claiming that everything the mainstream media does is fake news. So there is an interest by politicians or anyone really, to claim that certain content that they don't want to be spread or to be discussed as fake news. Now this obviously, and I think that the Singapore law really reflects this, impacts the freedom of expression, which is, for example, from a European perspective, a part of the European Convention on Human Rights. So this is really a human right, and thus also the states are obligated to protect this. On the flip side of this, states are not really, you don't have a right to correct information. So the state may limit freedom of expression in order to do that, but you don't have a human right to receive correct information. Right,
and also in line with having an effect on, you know, individuals and our human rights, it also has a massive effect on the media and freedom of the press and the way in which the media is able to, you know, communicate its stories, how cautious they have to be about what will be taken down, how does, you know, excessive regulation in the area of fake news, how does that affect, especially if it's, you know, if it's promoted by a government that has a specific type of image that they want to portray, or has a specific type of narrative that they want to portray? How does this affect the media's ability to do what it does and, hold governments accountable, act as a mouthpiece for the society? All of those things are definitely in question.
And these questions are the ones that we will pose in our next episodes. This series will have 3 episodes, with this one being the first one as kind of an introduction and a bit of a description of the field. The second one will focus, as you said, on the media and how this regulation can affect the freedom of the press and the media as a whole, and these kind of things. And there will be a third episode focusing on platforms and how they respond to fake news and fake news regulation.
Yeah, so we really, really hope that you all continue to stay tuned with us. In the next 2 episodes, we're really going to go into depth, talk about different jurisdictions, and really try to give our honest opinion on what we think about this area and, the legal implications, the social implications, and so on. So, yeah, we hope you continue to listen, and we hope that you've enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to having you next time on the Ars Aequi podcast.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ars Aequi podcast. Check out our other podcast, Ars Boni, brought to you by the Department of Innovation and Digitalization in Law. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe, and leave your comments down below. Thank you again, and join us next time on the Ars Aequi podcast.